At 8:30 in the morning of March 23, 1945, Staff Sergeant Edward A. Carter, Jr. stepped forward on a frozen battlefield in Germany. They laughed at him when he stepped forward, not loudly, not openly, but enough for him to hear. They said he did not belong there. They said he was black, and black men were not made for this kind of fighting. 40 minutes later, the battlefield would be silent, and no one would be laughing. This is the story of a man the U.S. Army did not trust. A man it did not prepare for combat. A man it underestimated until the war forced them to watch. His name was Edward A. Carter, Jr. Edward Carter did not grow up expecting fairness. He grew up understanding how quickly it could be taken away. He was born in Los Angeles in 1916. His father had served in World War I. He came home wearing a uniform that earned him no respect outside the gate. Carter learned early that America had two faces. One, it showed the world, and one, it showed black families. By the time Carter was a teenager, his life already looked different from most American boys his age. His family moved overseas, India first, then China. He learned languages. He learned discipline. He learned how violence sounded when it arrived without warning. At 18, while other young men were finishing school, Carter was already at war, not under an American flag, under a Chinese one. He fought against the Japanese invasion of China. He carried weapons. He took fire. He watched men fall beside him. By the time World War II began, Carter had already seen combat. He had already done the things the U.S. Army would later claim black men could not do. None of that mattered when he came home. When Carter enlisted in the United States Army in 1941, the military was still segregated. Black soldiers were allowed to serve, but not to lead, not to fight. They were assigned to support roles, supply, labor, logistics. Combat units were white. The message was clear, even when no one said it out loud. Courage had a color, and it was not his. Carter was placed in a segregated unit. The training reflected expectations. Minimal, limited, careful not to give too much responsibility. Carter trained anyway, harder than most. Not because the Army believed in him, but because he knew the war would not care what color he was. He was right. By early 1945, American forces were pushing deeper into Germany. The war was nearing its end, but the fighting was far from over. Villages were contested, roads were trapped, enemy units were desperate and dangerous. Every advance carried risk. Carter's unit was ordered toward a small German town. The mission was simple on paper: scout ahead, identify enemy positions. Scouting meant exposure. It meant moving forward without cover. It meant being the first to draw fire. White soldiers hesitated. Some looked away. Some pretended not to hear the request for volunteers. Carter stepped forward. There were looks, quiet comments, a few half-smiles that carried more insult than humor. No one stopped him. As Carter moved ahead, the ground opened into enemy fire. German machine guns erupted. The sound was sharp, violent, unforgiving. He was pinned down almost immediately. Most men would have pulled back. Most men would have waited for orders. Carter did neither. He crawled forward, slowly, deliberately. Bullets tore into the dirt around him. He kept moving. He was hit. Once, then again. Pain followed. Blood followed. He did not stop. There was no glory in the moment. No witnesses cheering. Only survival. Carter reached a position no one expected him to reach. Close enough to see the enemy. Close enough to change the fight. The Army had not trained him for this. The system had not prepared him for success. But the battlefield did not care. What happened next would not be reported correctly. It would not be celebrated at the time. It would be written down quietly, then forgotten. But the men who were there never forgot what they saw. Because before Edward A. Carter, Jr. became a hero, before the numbers were counted, before the reports were written, he still had 40 minutes to survive. And those 40 minutes would change everything. The gunfire did not stop when Carter reached that position. It intensified. The German machine gun nest was closer than anyone had realized. Too close for comfort. Close enough that every movement mattered. Carter lay flat against the frozen ground. His breath was heavy. His uniform was dark with blood. One wound in his shoulder, another in his leg. He should have pulled back. Any reasonable order would have said retreat. But no order came. Behind him, his unit was pinned. Men pressed into the dirt, unable to move forward. Every second they stayed there, more fire poured in. Carter understood something in that moment. If he stayed still, men would die. If he moved, he might die alone. He moved. He dragged himself forward, inch by inch, until the sounds of German voices became clear. Shouting, reloading, confidence. They did not expect a black soldier to be this close. They did not expect anyone to be this close. Carter reached a fallen rifle. Not his, someone else's. He checked the magazine with shaking hands. Enough rounds. He waited, not out of fear, out of timing. When the gunfire paused for a reload, Carter rose just enough to fire. One shot, then another. The first enemy fell before he understood what was happening. The second turned too late. Carter did not rush. He did not panic. He moved with the calm of someone who had been here before. The machine gun went silent. For a brief moment, the battlefield changed shape. The pressure eased. The fire slackened. Carter used the moment. He pushed forward again, forcing his injured leg to move. Every step burned. Every breath hurt. Another enemy position opened fire from his right. Rifle shots. Close range. Carter dropped. Rolled. Returned fire. One fell. Then another. Time slowed into fragments. Noise. Movement. Silence. Behind him, his unit began to move. Slowly at first. Cautiously. They saw what he was doing. They followed. German resistance stiffened as they realized what was happening. They were being flanked by one man. Carter changed weapons when his rifle ran dry, a submachine gun taken from the ground. He did not hesitate. He advanced again. The fighting collapsed into chaos. Short bursts, shouts cut off mid-sentence, men dropping where they stood. Carter was hit again, a sharp impact to his side. He stumbled, caught himself. He stayed upright. He had lost count of how long it had been. Minutes blurred together. Pain became background noise. He focused on movement, on angles, on staying alive long enough to keep going. German soldiers began to retreat from their positions. Some tried to fall back. Some surrendered. Some never had the chance. By the time the firing finally stopped, the ground was still. 12 enemy soldiers lay dead or wounded around the positions Carter had taken. The exact number would later be debated. But no one argued that he had broken the fight. It had taken less than 40 minutes. When Carter finally collapsed, it was not from fear, it was from blood loss. Medics reached him as his unit secured the area. They worked quickly, silently. No one joked now, no one laughed. Men who had avoided his eyes earlier now stood watching. Some looked stunned, some looked ashamed. Carter was evacuated, carried away on a stretcher, his face pale, his body barely holding on. The report would come later. Typed, filed, stripped of emotion. It would say he volunteered, that he advanced under heavy fire, that he continued despite wounds. It would not say why he had to prove himself this way. For the rest of the war, Carter survived. Barely. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor. At the time, it was the highest the Army would give a black soldier. The men who had seen the fight knew the truth, but truth did not always travel far. When the war ended, Carter returned to an America that had not changed. He wore his uniform. He wore his medals. They did not protect him. He struggled to find work. He struggled with his health. The wounds never fully healed. Years passed. History moved on. Carter's story faded into archives, into footnotes, into silence. It would take nearly 50 years for the Army to look again at what happened in that German field, to read the reports carefully, to ask uncomfortable questions. In 1997, Edward A. Carter, Jr. was finally awarded the Medal of Honor, posthumously. Too late for him, too late for justice, But not too late for the record, because for 40 minutes in World War II, a man they mocked for being black did what they said he could not do. And the battlefield never forgot. The fighting did not end Carter's battle. It only changed its shape. He woke up days later in a field hospital. White sheets, the smell of antiseptic, pain everywhere. Doctors spoke over him, not to him. They talked about bullets removed, about blood loss, about how close it had been. No one talked about what he had done. Other wounded men filled the ward. Some whispered his name. Word had traveled faster than paperwork. He's the one. The scout. The black guy who broke the line. Carter listened without reacting. He had learned long ago that praise was fragile. It disappeared as quickly as it arrived. An officer eventually came. He stood at the foot of the bed. He cleared his throat. He thanked Carter for his actions. He said the unit owed him their lives. He said it carefully, like the words themselves were dangerous. Then he left. No promise followed, no mention of promotion, no talk of change. The army moved on. When Carter returned to his unit weeks later, things were different, and exactly the same. Men nodded now. They made space for him. Some even smiled. But orders did not change. Assignments did not change. The system did not change. He was still black in a segregated army, still a man expected to prove himself again and again. The report from that day moved up the chain of command, typed, reviewed, rewritten. Details softened, language tightened, impact reduced, heroism acknowledged, context removed. Carter was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation spoke of bravery, of wounds, of advancing under fire. It did not say this was the highest honor the Army would allow him to receive at the time. It did not say race drew that line. Photographs were taken, hands were shaken, then the moment passed. The war continued. Carter survived it. Many did not. When Germany surrendered, celebration filled the streets of Europe. Carter watched from the edge. He wore the same uniform as everyone else. But the welcome was not the same. Back home, America was unchanged. Segregation was still law. Suspicion was still habit. Carter returned with injuries that never healed properly. Pain followed him into civilian life. So did silence. Jobs were hard to find. Employers saw his skin before his medals. Doctors treated his wounds, not his past. He did not complain publicly. He did not tour stages. He did not become a symbol. He lived quietly, worked when he could, endured when he could not. Years passed. World War II became history. Textbooks filled shelves. Movies filled theaters. The stories they chose were clean, simple, comfortable. Carter's story did not fit. It lived in after-action reports, in witness statements, in memories of men who grew old and died. In the 1990s, something changed. Researchers began reviewing awards given to black soldiers in World War II. They noticed a pattern: extraordinary actions, lower recognition. The files were reopened. Eyewitness accounts were read again. Details compared. Questions asked that should have been asked decades earlier. One file stood out: Edward A. Carter, Jr. What had been called bravery now looked like something more. What had been minimized now looked undeniable. The recommendation was made. In January 1997, more than 50 years after that firefight in Germany, the decision came. Edward A. Carter, Jr. would be awarded the Medal of Honor. He was not there to receive it. He had died in 1963, 48 years old, long before the country decided to look closely. The medal was presented to his family. Speeches were made. Mistakes were acknowledged. History was corrected, on paper, but paper could not give Carter back his health, or his years, or the respect he should have known when it mattered. The Army called him a hero. At last, the truth was simpler. He had always been one. For 40 minutes in World War II, he did what the system said he could not. He saved lives. He broke an enemy line. He proved courage did not belong to one color. And then he returned to a country that asked him to wait. Edward Carter did not live to see his name spoken aloud in classrooms. He did not live to hear his actions described without hesitation. He did not live to see the silence break. For decades after his death, his story existed in fragments. A citation here, a witness statement there, nothing connected, nothing complete. America remembered World War II as a victory, as a clean fight, as a moral war. It preferred heroes that fit easily into that story. Carter did not. He was a reminder that freedom was unevenly distributed, that bravery was welcomed, but equality was not, that the same uniform did not mean the same treatment. When the Medal of Honor was finally awarded in 1997, it was framed as a correction, a wrong made right, a gap filled. But it also raised an uncomfortable question. Why did it take more than 50 years? The answer was not hidden. It was written into policy, into tradition, into habit. During the war, black soldiers had been praised quietly and limited loudly. Their actions were recorded. Their recognition was delayed. Carter's case was not unique. It was representative. Hundreds of black soldiers performed acts of heroism that met the standard for the highest honors. Most never received them in their lifetime. Some never received them at all. History had been selective. In the years after Carter's Medal of Honor, his name began to appear more often. In military studies, in documentaries, in footnotes that finally grew into paragraphs. But even now, his story is not widely known. There is no blockbuster film about him, no household familiarity. And that silence matters. Because silence teaches. It teaches who is remembered and who is not. Carter's legacy is not just about what he did in 40 minutes. It is about what came after, about what was denied, about what had to be reclaimed. He proved something on that battlefield in Germany, not just to the enemy, but to his own army. He proved that training mattered less than trust, that courage did not wait for permission, that excellence could exist even when opportunity did not. The men who fought beside him knew it immediately. They carried that knowledge home with them. The institution took longer. Today, the U.S. military is no longer segregated by law. But the past has not disappeared. It informs culture. It shapes memory. Stories like Carter's are not about reopening wounds. They are about understanding how they were inflicted. They remind us that progress was not automatic. It was forced by people who acted despite resistance. Edward A. Carter Jr. did not fight for recognition. He fought because men were pinned down, because lives were at risk, because the moment demanded action. The recognition came later, too late for him, but not too late for the record, because history is not fixed. It is revised by those willing to look again. And when we look again, we see this clearly. They mocked him for being black. They doubted him. They limited him. Until the war stripped away excuses. Until 40 minutes of fire left no room for denial. Edward A. Carter Jr. did not ask to be a symbol. But he became one, a symbol of courage under pressure, of excellence under constraint, of heroism that outlived prejudice. If this story made you pause, if it made you question the versions of history you were taught, then it has done its job. Because remembering is not passive, it is a choice. Share this story with someone who believes they already know World War II. Subscribe if you want more stories. History waited too long to tell, and leave a comment. Not for the algorithm, but to say his name, Edward A. Carter Jr. Because heroes are not defined by who believed in them. They are defined by what they did when it mattered.